somewhere in Santa Clara, a line item vanished from a planning model. No court order, no new decree. Nvidia's own filings, confirmed by early 2026, show the company had quietly stopped treating Chinese demand as a number worth building around. Why would the company that built much of its empire on Chinese demand walk away from that market before anyone forced it to? The H20 chip is the proof that Nvidia tried. It was purpose-built, engineered to the exact edge of what United States export rules permitted, designed to thread a needle that kept getting narrower. That chip is where this story lives. So, why would Nvidia walk away from Chinese demand before anyone forced it to? The answer most people land on first is the one that reads cleanest. Export controls made China too legally and politically treacherous to serve. The United States government issued successive rounds of restrictions targeting advanced artificial intelligence accelerators. Nvidia had to strip capability out of the H2O specifically to keep it below threshold. Compliance overhead is genuine. A single misstep in export documentation carries penalties that can rattle a company at the board level. The regulatory atmosphere is not background noise. It is a cost that shows up in headcount, legal review, and the pace at which product decisions get made. My instinct when I first read the filings was the same as most analysts I follow. Blame the policy environment. Blame Washington. That instinct is not wrong. It is just not the lever. The policy is the setting. What happened inside Nvidia is a corporate decision made inside that setting. And those are not the same thing. Here is where the first answer breaks down. No new ban forced this specific halt. The H20 existed precisely because Nvidia had already solved for the compliance problem. It was the answer to the export rules, not a victim of them. If policy were the ceiling, the H20 was already engineered to fit under it. The choice to deprioritize the H20 came from inside the building, which means politics explains the context, but not the decision. Why would the company that built much of its empire on Chinese demand walk away from that market before anyone forced it to? The second answer is about scarcity. Nvidia is capacity constrained at the foundry level. Leading-edge wafer starts are genuinely scarce, and reports suggest order books for advanced packaging are full well into any reasonable planning window. The Vera Rubin architecture, Nvidia's next-generation platform, is in high demand from cloud providers in the United States and allied countries, firms with signed contracts and no export complications attached. Every wafer allocated to an H2O, a chip sitting in regulatory limbo with an uncertain shipping horizon, is a wafer not running a Vera Rubin for a hyperscaler with cleared payment and no customs flag in sight. Think of a master glassblower with a 6-month backlog. A client calls to commission a custom piece, but that client's shipping address is flagged. Customs approval could take weeks or might never arrive. 3 other clients are standing at the door holding cleared checks. You do not hate the first client, you do the math. That math explains where the capacity went. It does not explain why China stopped being the kind of customer worth holding capacity for in the first place. Scarcity triage is a symptom of a priority shift, not its cause. Redirecting scarce supply toward confirmed demand is standard operations for any manufacturer. It describes what happened. It does not name the mechanism that made China fall off the priority list. Why would the company that built much of its empire on Chinese demand walk away from that market before anyone forced it to? Here is the hypothesis I want to test, and I think it is the real answer. Nvidia did not lose confidence in Chinese demand. It lost confidence in Chinese demand as a number it could put in a model. Those are different problems with different solutions, and only one of them has a fix. When a market's access is permanently uncertain, not blocked today, not clear tomorrow, just perpetually unresolvable, its option value in a capital allocation model collapses toward 0. Option value depends on 3 inputs: the probability of access, the timing of that access, and the discount rate you apply to cash flows that may or may not arrive. A market that can be cut off by regulatory action at any point, with no clear ceiling on restriction, no treaty protection, and no appeals process, cannot be modeled the same way as a market backed by a signed agreement. Think of it as a title deed on a house that a third party can void at any moment, with no compensation and no appeal. The price you would pay for that house is not market rate. It might approach zero, not because the house is in poor condition, but because you cannot underwrite the title. China, in Nvidia's planning model, became an uninsurable title. The export rule was designed to keep Nvidia's most advanced chips out of Chinese hands. What it also accomplished, perhaps unintentionally, was to make the Chinese market permanently uninsurable for Nvidia's own forward planning. The lock sealed one direction of flow. It also sealed Nvidia's capacity commitments away from a market it could no longer treat as a planning anchor. Read the restriction backward. What Washington locked away, Nvidia eventually stopped trying to hold. I should say clearly where I think both the optimistic and pessimistic readings go wrong. The bullish case is that Nvidia's training workload software ecosystem, the depth of framework optimization, the interconnect maturity, the breadth of tooling built around its architecture, is a moat that Chinese domestic alternatives cannot yet cross at scale for frontier model training. Huawei's Ascend line is the most frequently cited alternative, but independent benchmark data on it remains thin, and company claims and third-party estimates diverge significantly. If that moat holds, the China exit costs less than it looks on paper. The bearish case is that inference, not training, is where volume actually goes as artificial intelligence deployments scale, and that the gap on inference workloads is closing faster than Nvidia's internal assumptions allowed for. If that is true, Nvidia may have written off a market precisely as domestic Chinese alternatives were becoming competitive enough to serve it, meaning the exit was rational for the wrong reason. Both camps are anchoring to the wrong variable. The decision was not primarily about who wins the hardware race. It was about what kind of number a market has to be before it earns a slot in a capital plan. China stopped being that kind of number. Whether that proves to be the right call depends on how the regulatory environment evolves, which neither Nvidia nor anyone else controls. So the driving question was slightly the wrong one. Asking why Nvidia walked away assumes walking away was the move. It was not. The move was reclassification. China did not get removed from the sales pipeline. It got reclassified from revenue line to exposure, an asset with no reliable present value, held at a cost with no clear return horizon. The better question is this: at what point does a market stop being a market and start being a liability you are not being paid to hold? For Nvidia, the answer appears to be when you cannot write a probability next to it that a planning model will accept. My read is that this decision was less about geopolitics and more about the fundamental mechanics of capital allocation under uncertainty. That makes it less dramatic than the headlines suggest and considerably more instructive. It is a template, not an anomaly. Other chip designers with less domestic demand cushion will face the same question and will not have the same easy answer. The H2O was the proof that Nvidia tried. It was engineered to the exact millimeter of what the rules allowed, built to keep a market relationship alive that the regulatory environment was steadily making harder to sustain. The fact that it ended up deprioritized anyway is the whole story. The door was open. Nvidia looked at the lock on the frame and decided the title was not something it could insure. The chip built to cross the line is still sitting there. The line did not move. Nvidia's math did. Here is what I want to know from you. Do you think Nvidia's decision to write China out of the forecast is a template other United States chip designers will follow? Or is this specific to a company with enough domestic demand to absorb the loss? Leave that in the comments below. If the option value argument here opens something up for you, The next video goes one layer deeper into how semiconductor firms model politically uncertain markets. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch it when it drops.